that we have, Chris, and that's the whole trade deadline talk. And there's been a lot of names coming up, a lot of stuff on 32 Thoughts, which I found interesting. And the first is how Noah Dobson's name isn't entirely out there, according to Elliot Friedman, but just the thought that he might be out there, because Friedman was kind of vague with what he said. Is there was some stuff out there, but he didn't really elaborate. And Chris, I know you listened to 32 Thoughts, where I'm just working through the very last part of the thought line. I find it very interesting when it comes to if Dobson might be available. A 6'4" defender of his caliber, like, it doesn't come around often. Like, look in the case of the Red Wings. They would love Noah Dobson on that team.
Yep.
Every team, if he was available, most likely would be calling, and that's not speculatory. Is the way that Noah Dobson plays is he would be very highly coveted, especially at a time where teams are ramping up for playoffs.
My big question is realistically, and there's a name we didn't talk about earlier coming into this, is what are the Islanders doing in their process right now? I mean, right now they are, I believe, one of the teams that are 7 points out of a playoff spot. And, like you said, Dobson's name's coming, sounds like it's coming off the board. And another name that sounds like coming off the board is Brock Nelson, because they're talking about potentially extending him, where it seems like you might be in that aspect of having the conversation of starting a rebuild, and you could do something now and get a pretty good size trade. I mean, granted, they could wait until the off season, but it just seems odd with the situation they're in right now, pulling names back relatively quickly going into the Four Nations break. It's just very odd.
Well, the one thing I find odd about it is the Islanders have done this in years past. Look at some of the contracts that they got on the books right now. They've extended guys who probably shouldn't have been extended for 6-7 years, and their contracts are going to run until they're 40, 41. So you have this case, you have a very loyal organization. Their guys are their guys. And the way that the Islanders have operated is, if you're willing to re-sign at a certain number, they're willing to. It seems as if the player is willing to re-sign, I'm rephrasing here, they will kind of meet you halfway, if you know what I'm trying to say, Chris.
Yep.
Because, like, they have some decent pieces locked up, and then you start to look at contracts that are going to affect the team, even with a rising cap. And like you said, the Islanders are in a situation where 7 points out of the playoff picture, and we'll get to the playoff picture right away. Where do you draw the line to make the decision to sell, or maybe find one or two pieces that you do move for more long term?
Right. I mean, they realistically, looking at their hockey reference right now, they haven't made it out of the first round the last 2 years. And then obviously we're in this year, and the year before, 3 years ago, they didn't make the playoffs. So at what point do you have the conversation of maybe it's time we start to figure something else out and maybe move on from what you've been doing and do something different and try to be better?
Well, look at how the Chicago Blackhawks, they tore the studs out of the wall. They had DeBrincat, Doc. I know people would say Patrick Kane, even aging, would still be decent, and I'm not arguing against it. It's just everyone thought Patrick Kane was going to retire a Chicago Blackhawk, be a lifetime member of the team. Taves, his situation happens, and they end up with Bedard, guys like Nazer, Korchinski. Like, they have a really good team, a really good future.
They've got a core.
Yeah. They have that core that they were looking for with guys like Doc, DeBrincat. But like I say, they stripped the studs completely out of the wall. They shocked a lot of people doing it. But now you are in a case of look at the future that they've built for themselves. You've got Connor Bedard, who's going to be a superstar, and other guys around him. So I personally think the New York Islanders should be looking to do something similar. And does that start with Noah Dobson? I would say yes. Chris, is that a yes or no for you?
I think so. I mean, the Islanders have a superstar goalie, and you got to build around that.
Yeah. But you know, typically speaking is looking at many NHL drafts and kind of being in that atmosphere where I am and where I see things. I look at a player like Noah Dobson, and I don't know if you can very quickly go out in the next 2 to 3 NHL draft classes and get a guy with Dobson's physicality and his defensive nature, because Dobson will be a first pairing defenseman for the Islanders for years to come should they build around him and Sorokin. That becomes a question of, okay, where else on the team do you look to sell from? So
Maybe they can make a trade with Dobson or Nelson and get somebody that plays pond hockey.